Hello everyone, my name is Himanshu Sharma and in this video we will be creating our custom authentication in a Spring Boot application using Spring Security. So let's get started and head to the Spring Initializer website. Here we will be needing Maven, a define Himanshu artifact Spring Security custom. We'll be using Java 17 and in dependencies we need web, we need security, and we will use Lombok. So this will be our setup. Let's go ahead and generate the project and open it in your favorite IDE. Let's check our POM first. So we have the required dependencies, security, web, and Lombok. So let's create a controller first. You say package, controller, and then say Java class app controller, and then we say rest controller, public string get hello, and we return hello from application. We're going to do get mapping and say hello. Alright. So we just created a controller and let's quickly check the default behavior. So let's run the application. Enable. Alright, so the application is started and the default behavior is we are getting a password and the default username is user. So let's head to the Postman, create a new request, is a HTTP, and we are going to use the localhost 8080, and by default what we have to do is we need to use the basic auth. The username will be user and the password will be this one. So we copy it, paste it, test it, and yes, we are getting the response. And if there is any change in here, we will be getting a 401 error, unauthorized, right? Now what we are going to do is, instead of using this basic setup, we need our custom, and in the custom our expectation is we will be creating a security file, security key over here. So first we need is spring.output and say enable equals always. This is not a requirement, it just gives nice colors to your log. But yeah, for our key we need is app secret key, and we say secret test key. Okay, so this is our secret key and we expect that any request which contains this key in its header should be a valid one. If the key is not correct, then the request should be marked as unauthorized, or we should get a bad credential exception. Alright, so let's head to the application controller, and this is the endpoint which we are trying to safeguard. So first let's create a security directory, because we are going to create couple of related things. So we say security, and then in fact let me give you a primer. So what we can do is I can show you what we are going to do. First we are going to create an authentication object. This will contain the authentication status, whether it's authorized or unauthorized. Then we will be creating an authentication provider. It is responsible to perform the evaluation. So in our case, the evaluation is comparing the header value with the configuration value. Then we will be creating the authentication manager. Authentication manager is responsible to invoke the correct authentication provider. That means a single manager can invoke or can use multiple authentication providers. Then we will be having a authentication filter which is responsible to intercept the request and invoke the create the authentication object and finally pass it to authentication manager. And last we have a security config which will wire up this filter so that it can be considered in the Spring context. So let's start with the authentication object. So we go over here and we say that okay, let's create one more package and we define it authentication, and then create a file custom authentication, and what we are going to do is we will implement authentication interface. Go ahead and implement all its method. Alright, now we need two of our variables. One is boolean authentication and the another one is key. We will define the getter and setter, and also we will say we need the all-arc constructor. And the only change we need to make is this one. In the is authenticated, instead of returning false, we will be returning our authentication variable. Alright, so that's all you need to do for the custom authentication object. Now the next piece is provider. So go ahead and create a provider package, and here again we will be creating a custom authentication provider. In this we will be implement authentication provider interface and implement its two methods, authenticate and supports. You say okay, and we define it as a component, and we will use slf4j for logging purpose. And here, as I mentioned earlier, provider is responsible to perform the evaluation, and for that what we need is we need a variable which can gives us the app configuration value, that is app secret key, this one. So we say the rate value dollar like this. Yeah. Alright, so this will hold the application value, the configuration value, okay, the valid one. And here we are going to define the evaluation logic. So what we are going to do here is, first of all, this authentication object, we expect this to be as a custom authentication. So we say custom authentication, we cast it like this, and we say introduce variable custom authentication, and then we extract out the key, header key. So we say dot get key. Right, how it's getting this key, that will come later, because this key is getting filled by the filter. So right here we are accessing the value from our custom authentication object. So in this one we are getting the header key, that means the value coming in the request header. And finally the evaluation logic is we compare that secret key present in our configuration equals to the header key, and if that is true then we say that log request have valid key, and then we say return new custom authentication object with value true, and then we are passing the header key in it. Okay, so this is the critical point. Here we are created a new object, but we define the value as true, stating that okay, this is a authenticated request, it's an authorized one. And if not, if this is not true, then we say throw new bad credentials exception, and we specify that secret key in header did not match application secret key. Can remove this. Yeah, that's all. So this is all in the authenticate, and in the supports one what we will say is we'll say that custom authentication, this object, you say custom authentication dot class dot equals, and we specify the authentication, right? So here we are just checking that this object is of custom authentication class, this class, that's all. Now provider is invoked by manager, so let's create a manager. So we say manager, and we define a new class custom authentication manager. Here we will be implementing authentication manager interface, and again implement its only method, that is authenticate. Here since manager is going to invoke the authentication provider, so we'll say private final custom authentication provider, and we mark it as a component, and we say all our constructor, and in the authenticate method we simply invoke the provider, and we pass the authentication object here. So it's a very simple code. For authentication manager we are not doing anything much, just invoking the provider, and this provider authenticate method is responsible to validate and return the new authentication object if the valid is if the value is valid, and the authentication will be marked as true. Alright, so we have the manager now. Now the next piece is filter. So let's create a package, and we say filter, and we define a class as custom authentication filter. Here we are going to extend once per request filter, and we are going to implement the only method do filter internal. Again it's a component. Here we are using once per request filter because we need to make sure that our authentication logic will run only once per request. So here what we need is, we need the key. We say header key equals request dot get header and key. So this is the place where we are first time accessing the key which is coming in the request, and now we are going to create a custom authentication object in the filter. So private final custom authentication object. Oh sorry, we need to invoke the custom authentication manager. So we use the custom authentication manager here. Again it will be an all constructor like this, and here we are going to create the custom authentication object. So we say custom authentication object, new object, and here we are saying false and we are sending the header key. Finally we will invoke custom authentication manager authenticate, and we are passing the custom authentication here. And once it is authenticated, what we are going to do is, we will put the authenticated object in the security context. So we say security context holder dot get context dot set authentication, and can create a local variable authenticated object and then put it over here, right? And finally, since it's a do filter internal, we have to invoke the further filters. So we will use do filter and pass the request and response object. Alright, so let's format it like this. So yeah, so this is the whole code for authentication filter. What it is doing is, it is extracting the header key, and then this value is creating a custom authentication object, and initially we are setting it as false, that means unauthorized, and we let the authorization part decided by our authentication manager flow over here, which eventually gets to the provider evaluation logic, and accordingly it will be marked true if it is valid. Alright, so the security part is done. The only piece left is wiring up our filter. So for that, let's create a config. So let's say config, and then we'll say new Java class security config. It will be a configuration, and then we say private final, since we are going to wire the custom authentication filter, right? And in this we are going to create a bean of security filter chain. So we say like this, and we are going to use the http security like this, and we say okay throws exception, and again we can say that okay we need a all constructor, and here we will be returning http security. And how we are going to wire it, we will say add filter after, and in this function we will be specifying our custom authentication filter, and we are saying to add this filter after basic authentication filter class, and then we say authorize http request Okay, so you can use this one also, where you say that okay, any request and any request authenticated and build, but this part is deprecated, so you can refine it like this. So you can say auth and then use this auth inside it, like any request auth authenticated, and then remove this whole part over here and build. Right, now you will not get the deprecated issue. All right, and we need to mark it as a pin. All right, so let's revisit our configuration. The security configuration will wire up the authentication filter, custom authentication filter, and we are saying to add our custom authentication filter after the basic authentication filter, and then we are authorizing the requests accordingly. Now after this we head to the filter part, where we are saying that call the custom authentication manager using a custom authentication object, where we are passing the header key coming in the request, and by default we are setting the value as false. Once authenticated, we will be setting the authenticated object inside the security context folder get context authentication. Finally, we are invoking the filter chain to perform the processing of further filters. Now after authentication manager, here we are simply calling the authentication provider. In the authentication provider, what we are doing is we are evaluating whether the header key which is coming in the request is equal to the secret key which is present in our configuration. If yes, then it's a valid key, and we will be creating a new authentication object, marking it as a true, that it is authenticated, keeping the same header key which is coming in the request. If not, then we will be throwing a bad credentials exception, that the secret key in header is not matching with the secret key. Also, we override the supports method, where we are saying the custom authentication class equals the authentication passed over here. Finally, our custom authentication object, and here we define two variables, authentication and key, and then we implement the authentication interface, and the only thing we change is is authenticated method, where we say authentication. Instead of any other value, we are returning the authentication of this, and the key will hold the value of present in the request header. So let's look at the setup over here. All right, I think okay, let's refactor our code. I think we put this inside the authentication object itself. So let's refactor it. We move to package com. Yeah. Yeah, this one only. So okay, will it work? Security, yeah, it works. So we can do the same for this one also. We can remove it from filters, and we say move the package to this one. All right, and then we can delete this one, and then we can do the same for this also. All right, and then we can remove it, and we can remove this one also. Authentication. All right, so this will be like this. We are good with this one. Filter authentication manager, again this will be like this. All right. Yep. We are having two related problems. Do we have any? And then provider. Okay. Yeah, now we are good. We have the authentication for the object, the filters, the manager, the provider. And yeah, so let's run our application. All right, now we are getting, okay, this is the error. Yeah. Wait, this one, right. All right, let's rerun it. So our application is started. Let's head to the Postman. And before that, you can see now we are not getting that default generated password. Now our configurations are active. So let's head to the Postman and let's invoke this request again. But this time we are not going to use the basic auth. We say no auth and we head to the headers. And here we expect a key whose value is going to be the one present here, that is secret test key. So we use the same, paste it over here, send the request, and yes, we are getting the response back. So let's try to change the key and send it, and here we are getting the 403 forbidden. And if you look at the logs, we are getting the correct log that secret key header did not match and it fails, bad credentials exception. Alright, so it is working, and there is one last thing I want to show you. That is, we were discussing about the provider part over here. So we updated this supports method, right? And then I also told you that manager can use multiple authentication provider. Okay, so let's say we have a scenario where we say that okay, there is any other system which says that we want to use your API, but we can't send this key because they are using this key for a different system, and they say that they can send you a different key. So let's say they want that okay, we can send you a key like this, external key, and it will have an external secret. Okay, so what we can do is we can say external secret key, and we say external secret. Okay, external secret key and external secret. So basically what we are saying is there can be another use case which is actually sending a key in a different header, and in order to handle that you decided to use a different authentication provider. So now we can do for this also is we can create another custom authentication, and this time we say that okay, make it external authentication. Okay, we keep all these things as is, we are not complicating things over here, and then we go to our provider, and again we will create a new one saying that okay, external authentication provider, and in this case the evaluation logic depends upon the external secret key. So we will update this here, and we say let's say external app external secret key, right? So we copy it and we are going to use it over here. And this header key, let it come, and instead of custom we are going to use the external authentication object. We say like this. Alright, and here again in the supports one we are going to say external authentication, and the bad credentials we will say okay, custom authentication also we will refactor. And in the bad credentials we will say secret key in header did not match the external application secret key. So we are just changing the log to make sure that correct authentication provider is getting triggered. Now, so we created an external authentication provider and we created an external authentication object. So first of all, let's head to the filter. Here we will say like string external header key. Okay, now we are going to request the external key also. Okay, so we can say external key like this. Alright, and then we can say that okay, external header key, and we can put a condition over here that if external header key is not equals null, then if this external header key is not null, then instead of creating custom authentication we are going to create a external authentication. Okay, and we are going to pass the external header key over here, and we say external authentication like this. And alright, external authentication like this, and then in the else block we will say that call the custom authentication otherwise. Right, so this is the one we are going to call the authentication manager also. In both the case we are using the same authentication manager, we are not creating a new one, but in the first one it will be using the external authentication. In the second case the authentication will be using the custom authentication. Alright, so here we need the authentication object. So what we can do is we can put it outside and we can define it like this. Alright, so now our authenticated object will depend upon whether the external header key is present or not. Okay, now we need to make a change in the authentication manager. So let's get to the authentication manager. Earlier we have only one, so we simply call that provider. Now we are going to have two, so we say external authentication provider. Okay, and port class external authentication provider. And now how we are deciding which one to call? Here we will say if custom authentication provider supports authentication object, right, then invoke custom authentication provider authenticate method using this one, else invoke this one external authentication provider dot authenticate like this. Okay, and this one is going to be get class, and this one is going to be This will be like this only. Okay, so what we are saying is if the custom authentication provider supports this one, that means we are saying that a custom authentication object is coming over here, because if you look at the support method, we are checking whether the authentication class is actually of custom authentication, right? And in case of external authentication provider, we change that value to external authentication. Alright, so let's run this application. Let's restart it. Alright, it started. So let's check it out. First of all, let's remove this key and check for the external key. We are getting a 403 forbidden. Alright, why? Security secret key inherited external application, so that's fine. So what went wrong? Let's look at our authentication object. This is external authentication. That's fine. Let's head to the authentication provider. Here, app external secret key, and what's the value for this one? External secret. Oh, that's the mess. So let's underscore actually external underscore secret. Let's send it. It's still forbidden. External underscore secret. Yeah, that looks okay. And what error we are getting? Let's quickly check one more time. Okay, now we are getting a different error, cannot be cast to custom authentication. Where we are getting this? We are getting in the custom authentication provider. Okay, so I think we missed this part. We refactored it to the correct conditions, but we forgot to remove this one. So now, yeah, now let's restart. Alright, our application is started. Let's try one more time. External key, external secret. Yes, we are getting the value. And let's change it and send it. Now we are getting the error, and we need to make sure that it is coming from the external authentication. Yes. Now if you don't want to use this one, we want to use this one, we send the invalid value. We should get an error, but this time from the other authentication filter, that other authentication provider, the application secret key. And if we correct it out, we send it, and we are getting the value. Yeah, so let's revisit one last time. So we make the changes in the security config. We created a security config where we specify our filter, and we are saying to add this filter after the basic authentication filter. Then in the filter, we are invoking the authentication manager. Here we refer two keys, one for the key and another one is the external key in the request header, and we are saying that if external header key is present, create the external authentication object and invoke the authentication manager. If external header key is not present, then invoke the custom authentication object creation, and then call the authentication manager on the custom authentication. Finally, we will set the authenticated object in the security context and invoke the filter chain do filter method to perform the evaluations of further filters. Then we head to the manager. Here again, based on the supports method, we are deciding whether to invoke the custom authentication provider or the external authentication provider. Now heading on to the two providers, the custom authentication provider, in the authenticate we are evaluating based on the app secret key, and in the supports method we are supporting the custom authentication object. In case of external authentication provider, we are evaluating based on the app external secret key, and then in the supports method we are supporting the external authentication object. We don't need to make any change over here, and this is the complete configuration and the code. And the configuration side, we enabled the first output ANSI enabled to make the logs colorful, that's optional, and the other two are our different keys which are supported by different authentication providers. Alright, so that's all in this video. Thanks for watching. Please let me know if you have any suggestions or feedback. Thank you and have a nice day.